part of what happens in this space, as you know, is that there's this like idea that, you can get these celebrity endorsements and they can like go out and tout whatever you care about them touting. And then, maybe they move on to the next celebrity. And for us, we never wanted that because we were hyper-focused on the mission. And we didn't want anyone to sort of be talking about the tech or talking about us unless they really understood our mission.
Welcome to High Stakes, the podcast committed to demystifying the institutional adoption of blockchain technology. I'm your host, Alex Nowaka, and today we're elevating the Web3 discourse in a series of conversations with industry iconoclasts that are shaping the future of Web3. Now let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of High Stakes. I'm your host, Alex Nowaka, and today I am joined by Denelle Dixon, who is the CEO of Stellar Development Foundation. Welcome, Denelle.
Hi, thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Really excited to have you. So Denelle, what I figured we'd do is really start a little bit with your background and really, introduce yourself to our audience. You obviously had a very, sort of long and very established career before jumping into the blockchain space. You were at Mozilla. You were also at Yahoo. You were also in different functions along the way, started off in legal and then moved more towards operations. So maybe I'll just give you the floor to maybe talk a little bit about some of those formative experiences and what you would share. And then we can talk about how that all led you to where you are today.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is great. I love talking about that because I think some people think that you start a career and there's like a linear trail for your career. And definitely mine was not linear. And I think each experience along the way really taught me something different to be able to bring to this space. So I always wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I wanted to do that since I was in third grade because I saw a made-for-TV movie that made me realize how amazing trial lawyers could be. That's what I ended up doing. I went to law school and I started practicing and I practiced and I was a trial lawyer for 9 years. And it was amazing because I loved the idea of what trial work sort of brings, at least what it brought to me, is this foundation of understanding how to create a strategy and then how to execute against a strategy. And I did that case by case. So you look at a case and you'd say, okay, what is the client's ultimate goal here? Do they want to win? Do they want to get a business settlement? Do they want to, take some time so that it actually they want to get to a certain place before they can actually decide? All those things were captured. And then you said, okay, now what are the tactics that I can employ to get there? And so I leveraged that in terms of my working. I did a lot of work during that time with Yahoo as an outside lawyer and other technology companies in the very, very early days of tech. It sort of dates me, but I spent a lot of time with those companies really using this like strategy idea of how to even develop products and think about product development. Sort of helped to create this like what we now, a lot of companies have product counsel. At the time we didn't, and product counsel was sort of like really somebody who could work with the business and product teams to be able to ultimately get them to achieve their goals and to remove roadblocks for them. And so I did a lot of that work. And it all sort of stemmed again from like the early days of understanding strategies and then how to get the tactics in play to make it happen. It all came together. So I went to work for Yahoo, and in Yahoo, I come in very early in terms of on the legal side, but then did a lot of work with, because I knew the founders and I knew the senior executives at the time. And so I did a totally like this broad array of work for Yahoo, a lot of product work, also managed litigations. And the reason why I went into private equity is because I loved technology. I loved what I was doing, but there was this dark spot with respect to like, I don't really understand like how the business side of all of this comes together. And that was my transition into the business world really, is to understanding how to raise money, understanding like how to take a portfolio business and again, use those same skills about what is the outcome that we want to see and how do we get there. And so I did that for many years. And it was a hard job during that time because I was actually working mostly in Europe, but living in the United States. And so I was traveling a lot. But it was amazing to get from the private equity side of life to understand the different components of the businesses. But I missed tech. And I really wanted to come back into the tech sector. And so I always thought about Mozilla as this like perfect entity of business, policy, and tech coming together, but policy from the standpoint of not just advocating for Mozilla, but advocating for the industry, from an open source standpoint. And so I was able to come into Mozilla on the business side and the legal side. So I was managing the business teams and the legal teams, and then sort of transitioned into eventually becoming the COO there and really maintaining even like product work and really running like the full structure of the business and focusing on the revenue numbers. And it was tons of fun. And again, that trifecta is the thing that of business policy and tech was the thing I just loved. I loved that even in private equity, so much of the policy implicated what the outcome for that portfolio business could be. And then Jed found me, and we got introduced through a friend that had been at Mozilla for a long time. And Jed brought me into this world, and it was sort of like again, like that trifecta of business policy and tech. I recognized that we had done so many things wrong on the policy side from early days of tech and Web 2. And I wanted to right those. And I felt like dealing with money and really working with governments on like to think about like these new rails was a way to sort of embrace policy differently. And so the rest is sort of history. I love this job. This is like in terms of like the apex of my career, I look at this and I say, like, not only do I feel like we've done it right, although not gotten the right rewards all the time from the policy side, but we really engaged early. I think, but the first month I was here, May 2019, I went to DC, started spending a bunch of time on the Hill, really tried to advocate for this industry, not just for Stellar, but for the industry as a whole. And it's been just phenomenal experience ever since. So kind of bringing all of those skills together from a legal and business and technology side to make it all kind of work.
Oh, it's wonderful and weaves together sort of a lot of what you've done previously and sort of doing more of what you love to do and doing it at a sort of a different time period, maybe, and on a different scale. I'm curious, Denelle, of all your prior experiences, is there one or two that you sort of look at and you say, I really go back to that, consistently in my sort of current role? What are those experiences and why do you feel like, they're so valuable in sort of your current role?
That's such a great question. And on the spot, thinking about that, one of the things that I did when I was at Yahoo was we had been sued by lots of folks in China because they said that we had disclosed information to the Chinese government that created the Chinese government's ability to be able to go after folks and bring them in because they were like, they believed they were going up against the Chinese government. And so there was these arguments about what Yahoo had done wrong there. And it was one of the things that, when I looked back over the time period, I came after the disclosure had happened, but really spending time thinking, what did we do during that time? We moved really quickly. Yahoo was, and it's funny to think about them because they're not like in that space now, but they were a really big mover, early mover in tech. And they had feet on the ground in the region, which was really rare to have feet on the ground in China. And they did that because they wanted to be able to bring the technology and to bring the opportunities there. And as a result of that, there's a difference when you're in different geographies and how those governments operate with the companies that are there. And so certainly for me, it was a retrospective look at like what had happened and why we did what we did, which I understood and made a lot of sense. And then of course, there's the challenge with working with governments that you don't understand, or maybe it's very different from your own. For me, that was endemic of thinking about how you operate on a global scale and how you think about entry into different countries, and particularly about data. And so that is carried through for me kind of everywhere. Like when we think about operations and when we're thinking about companies that we're working with at the foundation that are in different regions, you always have to think about the local views. And it caused me, and I say this all the time, and I really deeply believe that local players have a much better understanding of how to operate in the areas in which they are. And a lot of that has to do with the local regulations, but also just like what's needed and what's necessary for the individuals there. And so much of it comes from that really complicated case and really complicated time period when I was at Yahoo, when I was dealing with a lot of really wonderful humans who experienced terrible tragedies as a result of what they believed of disclosures from Yahoo. And yet it was because Yahoo was doing the right thing in terms of moving quickly and trying to bring technology in. So that has just changed my view of, I guess impacted my view as to how I think about local development. And instead of like one company coming in and sort of telling the world how to operate, to really embrace the local talent that you have and to bring these smaller companies up maybe locally. So that's one thing. I think the other part of it, another time period of my career, when I think back in private equity and I think about what I do now, we do a lot of investments in companies. And one of the things that and I hate to say this because I'm not knocking all private equity, but I do think private equity sometimes come in and they think, oh, we can operationally change this business and we can make it so much better and that we're operators. And I think one of the things I learned during that time period is how important it is to respect and understand where the businesses came from, because it's really easy for us to make decisions. But if we don't look back at the history as to why they made the decisions they made before they got there, we might end up in the same trap. And so I think that's taught me a lot about how to be a board member, about how to be an investor, about how to really work with folks who are deeply ingrained in the work that they're doing, but help them to like level up and to come out of where they're at from the problems maybe. So I think that was like a really, I actually, a lot of times when I'm on boards with people and I see them being like very active and very determined and very like, just want to decide everything. And I say, that's kind of not our role. Our role is to understand where they're at and to give advice and to help them through it. And unless they got to a bad spot, we have to work with them to achieve the goals that they want rather than tell them what the goals are. So I think those are two big experiences for me that caused me to have like a very different perspective in terms of how I approach my job now.
Fabulous. Well, maybe let's talk a little bit more about sort of the mission of SDF. And, what I describe is like, how do you eat the elephant? I think that you and Stellar have done a really great job of really framing, hey, what are the steps here to get where we want to go? And, maybe for the audience, really the mission, as I understand it, SDF is really to, build the internet for payments, right? And focusing on global financial inclusion. That's obviously a huge, big, hairy, audacious goal, right? And the payments industry, $1 trillion industry. But maybe let's start with, in your view, how do you start? And what do you view as like the steps along the way to eat the elephant, as sort of the metaphor would go?
I think that's a great question. I think a mission needs to be audacious and big and bold in order for it to truly be a mission. Otherwise, it's just your goals and your KPIs that you're trying to achieve, right? And so when I got to the foundation, Jed had already really established this notion of this payment standard. And I wanted to make that real for people in terms of how you think about it. And so we talked about the mission as being creating equitable access to the global financial system using this technology. And it's important to me. There's two things that are really important. First, we're not saying that we can get to that financial inclusion layer. We create the technology that allows access. And then hopefully the people building on the edge of that technology can get to the inclusion. But we want to make sure that the access is there. And then the second thing that's really important to me is that if for some reason along the way, we decided that, this isn't actually the right way to go about doing it, maybe it's not blockchain. I doubt that's the case, but maybe there's other things. We have to be mindful of constantly, and I do this every year, I constantly, as I'm doing the goals for the foundation and I'm thinking about what we're focused on, I reevaluate our mission. I reevaluate the high level steps that we've said we're going to take to get there, because I want us to make sure that we're still headed in the right direction. I think if you don't do that, you're never going to be really wedded to it. That's sort of the way that I think about it. But I always said in the very beginning, when I first came to the foundation in 2019, we have to think about the mission in bite-sized chunks. And you can't just say, oh, we're going to go out and nail this thing because it's just so big and so audacious. And so I think when I was a trial lawyer, I always thought about creating the steps for each of when I was making a pitch to a jury, or when I was coming up and talking to a judge, I always wanted to lay the foundational pieces and then you put all the bricks on the wall. That's how we used to talk about it when I was in trial practice. You have to create a wall. You need to have the foundation put in place. And I think that one of the most important things that got lost in a lot of this focus on blockchain and crypto was that foundation of, the on and off ramps, and to be able to bridge with traditional financial infrastructure in a keen way to make it so that, it's actually workable. The system's actually workable, to make sure that you have those proper validators that are running on the network, to make sure that you have a lot of different players who want to be anchors so that you have assets. These are all foundational components, which are not super sexy, which are not the thing that people want to talk about all the time. But unless you really lay that foundation, you can't achieve what you want in terms of building your big wall, or your bridge, if you want to call it whatever you want to call it in this industry. And so I think that so much of it has to do with creating those steps along the way. And we literally think about it. And every time we're doing something, what we do is we model out what the minimum viable ecosystem is for example, the anchor network? What's the minimum viable ecosystem there? We need to make sure to achieve that and then go beyond. We're well beyond that. What's the minimum viable ecosystem to be able to have payments that are, you need liquidity, you need to go through and like parse out every little step of it to make sure that you have that in spades, right? You have to have more than one. What's the minimum viable ecosystem for Sorbonne, which is the smart contract platform that we brought to the network? These are all things that you have to think about, because if you try to think about this massive goal, you can lose sight of everything. But if you create the steps along the way, then you can achieve it. And so that is the way that I think about kind of everything is, what is the bite-sized piece we need to get to? What's the next one? What's the next one? It would be like refreshing and freeing to just be like, okay, now we can just grow. But unfortunately, that's just not the way that it works. You need to get all these things in play, and maybe then you see growth there. Then you go, okay, what's the next thing I need to see? And then you got to see growth there.
Inherent in that answer is, I think, a hat tip to also picking really great and developing really great partnerships. And I'd be curious from your perspective, what partners, whether type or specific named partners, you think have really helped define impact for SDF and what it does. And then I have a follow-up question actually after that one that's also related to partnerships, but I'll start with there.
I think partnerships are the most important piece, not just of achieving what we ultimately want to see with the mission, but just being successful in business at all. And partnerships, in that there's a lot of transparency and honesty in them, and where both sides don't get exactly what they want, but they get what they both need. And I think that's the complicated nature, especially, I'll just be honest, in this business. You have a lot of money and you have a lot of demands, and a lot of people put a lot of money on the table to get things done, which makes it complicated, really, because sometimes money is what you need, but sometimes there's other components to it. And sometimes money is what you have, but you really need to be able to achieve a different piece. And so I'm constantly trying to like really right size things for us in terms of how much we spend to achieve partnerships or how much we give to, even in terms of our development efforts. I think that, MoneyGram, I started trying to work with MoneyGram in 2019. It was actually probably in the end of May. So I started May 1st. I started way back then trying to get that goal. And so lots of different iterations of that conversation. But I saw the need to be able to have global on and off ramps really early. And I really, really wanted to make that happen because I felt like that was the way, not just to demonstrate a bridge between traditional financial infrastructure and the new stuff, but to really make it all work, because you needed a credit card or bank account. And here we are talking about how we're going to get to the masses and like get to the unbanked. And if you can't even get them on the network, it makes it really hard to do that. That was a crucial partnership to be able to achieve. And then to be able to take a 75-year-old business in MoneyGram and to have it work so seamlessly with blockchain was also another part of it. But I think that was a really big one. And it had a lot to do with the folks I was working with on the MoneyGram side, and also really understanding how to navigate, what had been told to MoneyGram for so long was that you're going to be disrupted and you're going to go away because blockchain's amazing. And in fact, it was on our website that it said, like, we're going to disrupt and make the players like MoneyGram go away. When I was talking to them, the CFO said to me, Denelle, you understand that on your website, you actually say that you're going to eliminate us. And I was like, no, I didn't understand that, because that's actually not what I want to do. That was part of like, just really like becoming more mature as an organization, thinking about like the structure and what we really wanted. And so MoneyGram is one. And then I think another one that was a really, maybe more important to me in terms of working with like the UNHCR, such a massive organization. And the reason I love their global reach, I love all the things that they do. But I think the reason why that demonstrated such a step for us was the working with an organization like them and getting things done in 9 months that normally takes like 2 years. That demonstrated like an interest in our business and the work that we're doing, and that we could execute against like this massive organization and work with them to achieve what they wanted. So those were, I think, the two partnerships that there's so many more, but I just feel like those two were instrumental in like validating for me, yeah, we've got this. We can take this to the next level.
And incredible, brands in their own right. And the other question I had that's related, and I think a bit of a harder question, is who would be the most most interesting partner for SDF in terms of its next sort of set of milestones? that you're not already working with?
It's hard because I think that we have sort of three verticals that we really want to pay attention to. Tokenization is a really big part of it because I feel like that delivers opportunities. And I think we're going to see tokenization of these real world assets, the yield assets, for example, even though, because they're going to be all over the world. And I think they bring a different dimension to payments and to what we want to see achieve. So that's one area. Then we also have the idea of just payments specifically. And I'd love to see like big name merchants there. And then there's also the idea of the DeFi space. And there's so many players there. But I do think like if I had to pick one in covering those three areas, I think that merchant payouts with like Airbnbs or with, using like think Stripes merchants and who they're paying out to globally. Those players, I think, really bring that payment use to the network in exactly the way that's relevant because they're globally making payments. I'll say the other one, like if I could get like an ADP or a payroll service to leverage Stellar. Again, I know that that's not the sexy brand. Sorry, ADP, but I know you're not. Like that isn't like payroll's not sexy, but it is the thing that I think really demonstrates like global reach and opportunity for end users all over. So I think merchants, big name merchants, but also like those payroll providers kind of change everything.
So one of the things that I was having a conversation with someone about a couple of weeks ago was how Stellar's the only layer one that I can think of that has had a consistent, I'll call it involvement and endorsement in a very genuine way from somebody that I would consider a celebrity, in Idris Elba. And I'm really curious, and I'm sure the audience is as well, in terms of how that relationship got started and catalyzed. I know he's been involved in several of, I think the last two Meridian conferences and so forth. And again, I think a hat tip to both him and to Stellar in terms of just how impactful and like genuine it all is. And so I wanted to give you the opportunity maybe to talk a little bit about that, because I think it's a very unique element here of partnership that I think is done extremely well. And so I wanted to make sure that we sort of covered and highlighted it.
Well, thank you. That is, thanks for saying that it's done well. I think that part of what happens in this space, as you know, is that there's this like idea that, you can get these celebrity endorsements and they can like go out and tout whatever you care about them touting. And then, maybe they move on to the next celebrity. And for us, we never wanted that because we were hyper-focused on the mission and we didn't want anyone to sort of be talking about the tech or talking about us unless they really understood our mission. We were able to meet Idris and his team, and there are so many ways that we connected in terms of, he and his wife are both focused on a lot, like they're UN ambassadors, or they were, and they spend a bunch of time focusing on the global good and how they can actually achieve all the different components of equality that they see necessary, not just in the areas in which they live and work, but also in areas that they're deeply connected to. When we started talking and we started like really, he wanted to understand our business. And when I talked a lot about what I saw in West Africa in particular, which I know is like a really special place for Idris and the need for this technology, he was just like lit up about it. Like how can we bring this together? And so we started our relationship by really using ideas around what he cares about and like the things that he cares about that we're doing, things that he cares about in the world. And so I thought, well, what do people that are in that space need? And like, what do creatives need? And that's how we got to talking just about the tech stack and what the tech stack can do and really showing him the depth of it. We leveraged him to create this, I think, wonderful video that he made for us last year, where he directed it. And he also pulled together some of the content for it, really showcasing what Stellar does. And I just think that it's a beautiful friendship. It's a beautiful like relationship because we both care about the same things. Like as Stellar, as the SDF, it's also what we care about. And then I personally care about it. And so finding those areas of collaboration where there's passion about the things that are happening in the world, like in Ghana, which he is, he's deeply connected to because his mom is from Ghana. And when you think about what the challenges there, and especially the challenges with creatives, they couldn't get money into the continent. or you could, but you're paying like 15% fees on it. And these are people we met when we went there together, and just really solving that problem for them is just something that's like we're both deeply committed to. So it's been so much fun and such an eye opener to be with someone of his talent, but also just his desire to change the world for the better in any way that he can. And I think we at SDF feel that too. Like that's who we are at our core. And so, yeah, I think it's been a really great thing, but we've just tried very hard to steer it to those areas of our work that he cares about and that we care about. So not all areas, but make sure that those areas are the ones that are covered.
And I would say as just somebody that's a third party, observing this, I think it's, as I said, done well. And it does, come across in that way very specifically. And I think it's a great example, frankly, for others in the space. So we talked a little bit about Meridian, or I sort of, inserted it there. So Stellar just recently celebrated 10th anniversary at Meridian 2024. So one, congrats. That's like obviously a decade. It's a huge milestone for any project. There were a ton of different announcements, as there always are. One thing I wanted to ask you about is I don't think the industry and frankly, folks from the outside really appreciate how big an ecosystem event like Meridian is and how a leader of that ecosystem looks at it. And so what I'm curious about, Denelle, is how do you think about measuring the success of Meridian in any given iteration of it? What are the things you look at, both before and after to sort of measure, it could be impact or just how effective Meridian was? I'm just curious if you could walk the audience through that.
There's many great things about Meridian. In advance of it, it's a forcing function for us to be able to get things done like Sorbonne, for example, the year before, and to really showcase and highlight the components of the work that we're doing and to highlight the work that our partners and folks that are building on the ecosystem are doing. Everybody has access to one another. Everybody's like really focused on engagement. And those are all the pieces that we want. That's the genesis of it. We're a convener of all of these people. The outcomes that I want to see year on year are, did we grow our developer base? Did we bring people in from the developer side that really weren't part of the ecosystem before? How many new attendees do we have that were not people? I love the people that keep coming back, but also we want to bring new faces and new life into it so that we can make even more dramatic impacts on the world. So I'm constantly looking at those numbers. Do we bring new people in? And in fact, I start in January really saying, what's the size that we're going to target for Meridian? And what percentage of new people do we want to bring? What percentage of developers do we want to bring? Two really, really important areas to focus on. And so, of course, we want to celebrate our existing ecosystem, and we want that to shine for people who haven't yet experienced it. And the other hard thing is we don't want to do it in a hotel lobby where everybody goes and it doesn't feel special and it doesn't feel like gritty like Stellar is. So there's this challenge with getting to the right size and having the right amount of new people, the right amount of developers, and the right amount of ecosystem participants, and the right, honestly, I get down to the number of stages that we have because I don't want too much to impact how people are going to be able to showcase their work if there's too many things going on. And so the outcomes for me is almost like an NPS score. We certainly do surveys, we do that, but also it's the sheer numbers of it in terms of what happens now with those developers who came and saw. We did a hackathon this year right before, and it was really wonderful to be able to have the hackathon in advance. And then we had many of those folks join us. And again, the developer component is so important and has been for most of my career so important to focus on developers, their safety, their security, their happiness within an organization and within an ecosystem. Those are the main things that I look for. And of course, I want people to have fun. That's kind of like the NPS score, right? Did everybody have a good time and that part? But it is the most fun and the most a week of too much work and too many people and too much stuff going on. But the outcomes and the memories from it, those are my favorite times here. And we've been doing it since 2019. We started our first one in Mexico City in November of 2019. And have done them some virtual ever since.
And, I think the couple things that you highlighted there that I heard, one is that you want to make it impactful and intimate, right, for the folks that are there. And the other thing I would actually highlight is, when I look at the announcements that come out at Meridian every year, there's a lot of real substance, especially with, really big brands that even someone who's not in Web3 would really recognize, right? And I'm thinking about Stripe's announcement. integrated, Stellar to enable global crypto payments. I think about Franklin Templeton, which you highlighted before. I guess on Stripe, it's very interesting because I feel like they've been in the news a lot recently. And I know that you guys have, a relationship with them, but they, made news by acquiring Bridge for a large amount of money, about $1 billion. I'm curious because you mentioned them as one of those partners that you believe is just so aligned with who they serve in terms of merchants. Maybe a little bit on like how you guys think about Stripe as a partner and frankly what you're observing them do. I just think the level of activity and how much they're leaning into this space at this point in time is newsworthy. And I think that of all people in the industry, you might have a perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. We've been talking to Stripe since, Stripe first came in and gave a loan to the foundation in 2015 or something like that. And so we've been deeply connected to Stripe for a really long time. But honestly, like despite many, many efforts, because of where they were as a company, we would get like to a place where we'd be like, okay, we're going to do this thing. And then it would be like, well, no, we're not really going to do that. And the thing that I loved this summer and at Stripe's event in San Francisco is Patrick embraced the idea that crypto's back. And it was funny to me because I was like, well, it's kind of always been here, but I get it like back for you guys, like where you guys can be in it. And I think so much of it as a public company, it makes it really hard, right? Like they have to be thoughtful about like what they're doing and like how they're doing things differently. And crypto is sort of, for many companies, was like a scary thing. And I loved that they embraced it and that they've done everything now to demonstrate that that's actually real to them. The payouts, all of the like being the settlement, like all of the different components that they're leveraging crypto for now is really great. And then I loved their acquisition. I mean, I don't know, like I'll just be honest and say like when I see a company like Bridge be acquired, I love Zach. Like that's a great company. They're doing a ton of work on Stellar. They have a lot of partnerships on the network, and I'm super happy for them if that's actually going to allow them to continue to grow their business differently. I'd be really sad if it was like one of those acquisitions of old where Google used to acquire businesses and then you wouldn't really see the business anymore, or Yahoo did. Don't think that's what they're going to do. And that's not my understanding right now. And I feel good about that. But I like that they're following through on their idea of like crypto's back and we're going to demonstrate that. And so I think we're going to see more from them. I think we would love to be able to work with them in terms of payouts for the aid side of the work, because I think that's really amazing. And I want to see them do merchant payouts. And I think that, eventually it took a little bit from a policy standpoint to get the United States government comfortable with some of these things for lots of reasons, silly reasons. But I think we're there now. And I think we're just going to see a lot of momentum in this kind of Stripe's business, and not just for Stripe, but other players in that business too. We're going to see a lot more momentum there, but it's been great to watch. And I just love that crypto is back for them.
Yeah. I think everybody is.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I thought you would be uniquely able to help demystify for listeners that we have that maybe come from the traditional finance patch or even frankly Web 2, there's always this concept of, CEOs of publicly traded companies are always sort of like watching their stock price, right? Because it's sort of like the best feedback mechanism for what they're doing, decisions they're making. We can argue about the wisdom of the crowd, and so forth. I think some folks take that rationale to Web3 and are tracking, hey, how is a token doing? And is that somehow a vote on, the opportunity that the layer one has, or is it, speaking to what's going on from the fundamentals? I just be curious, Lumens is up, like most assets since the election, but maybe just for demystifying for people how an executive at a layer one, thinks about or doesn't think about for that, the token price. Can you kind of, maybe demystify that a little bit for folks?
I don't normally talk about this, but I'm going to tell you, like, it's a complicated area because it's so different than traditional business. And it's so different from the business world that I came from for years and years and years, where actually stock price is not so much, it's sometimes forward looking, but a lot of times it's like historical. It's based on like what's happened and like showing the step change for a business. And that's what the stock price does. Like people invest because they go, oh my gosh, like they're going to do an amazing job in XYZ this year. And so they'll put money in and the stock price will go up. Or they'll say they did a great job last year and they put money in. It's just so different in crypto. And yet the hard thing about it is that the price of a token is important because whether you're in the top 10 or the top 20 determines whether you're going to get focus from a lot of the traditional players in the traditional financial infrastructure, they look at that list and they're going to be like, oh, well, who's in the top 10 and who should we be talking to? And also whether you're going to get attention in the media and press for the things that you're doing depend a lot on that list of like whether it's the top 10 or top 20. And so not being in that space, because there's so many different tokens that can come in and for a minute take over, even though they don't have longevity and they don't have maybe the opportunity that SDF or Stellar has, for example, it's frustrating. So I'm not going to lie, we have to look at it. It's something that we have to pay attention to because we have to say, okay, well, where are we falling in terms of others right now? Is there anything I can do as a result of it? Not really, because the stuff that we do at the foundation doesn't always make any difference in terms of like what's happening in the price. Mostly the price is following Bitcoin, or mostly the price is following the traditional markets. And so it's not really about anything happening at the foundation. It's an important number that I pay attention to. I have to. It would be silly for me to say that I don't, but it's not a number that gives me a lot of indication of how successful we are. Because I will tell you, I believe, and I know you have lots of other friends and other layer ones, so you don't have to agree with me, but I will tell you that I believe that what Stellar has done is very different from any other ecosystem out there. Foundations, creating those foundations, creating the infrastructure, making sure that we paid attention to those pieces and not gotten lost in the, all the different shiny objects that come. We've done that. We've stayed true to it. We've stayed true to the mission about payments. And we are like the best layer one to be able to put tokenized assets on because of cost, speed, scalability, the ability to be able to have security. And then the best layer one to put payments on and any kind of payments infrastructure. And now DeFi, it's the time to come into create this new DeFi space that's so remarkable. Not all of that is represented in the token price. That just is.
No, absolutely. And I think it's a very, astute answer to that question. And, one of the things I didn't ask you before, which I'll ask you now, is when you think about North Star KPI or metric, right? I think that, every business has, maybe one, maybe two things that they just look at and they say that if you told me any given day, that'll give me a sense of where the business is and to help that business. Is there one North Star metric for you that you're constantly watching that it has real sort of fundamental like value from your perspective, or is it more than one thing?
Well, it's more than one thing now because I think with Sorbonne, I have to look at TVL, even though I think TVL, I'll just also be very honest, I think it's a little bit of a vanity metric, but it's important. And it's important to people out there to see it. So I look at TVL on Sorbonne and I need it to grow. I need it to grow to $1 billion, $1.5 billion. And that is going to be a key focus for us in 2025 to help to make that happen with more protocols and then more robust protocols on the network. But I think what's really most important, we call them accounts on the network, but really it's addresses. And I think addresses is really the metric that we have 3 top level OKRs this year for 2025. One's going to be in DeFi, one's going to be in tokenization, and one's going to be in payments. Really, addresses kind of lays out all of those and crosses all 3 of them and makes like it's a super important metric to follow. It doesn't tell the whole story, but it tells a really important story about that growth. And we need to see significant growth in addresses for Sorbonne, for DeFi, for all of the different areas for the tokenization. So I think that's a good one to look at. But yeah, like there's a lot of them. We track a lot, but that's the one that I hit on is like, this kind of cuts across all 3 areas for us and makes it so that it's real. I mean,
I'll just say as a business leader myself, right? I think there's an aspect of you want some North Star metric that you feel like cuts across a variety of different areas. It turns out it's really hard to get one metric that is that every single function in an organization can buy into all the way down to, sort of your engineering team. So we also have that a similar, sort of what I'll call sort of gradient as it relates to certain KPIs. Denelle, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I think just last week you testified or presented in front of the House Financial Services Committee. You mentioned as part of your lead into your background that, this is not a new thing for you. You've done this before in your career in terms of really engaging legislators and regulators and so forth. But maybe I'll ask you, what has that experience been like for you to go in? Because that is just such a unique, I think, experience that most people don't get the chance to ever have. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what that experience is like and the good, the bad, and sort of the unexpected, maybe. Yeah, I am so honored to be a part of those. It's actually funny when I think about the reason why it feels like
the thing that I really enjoy doing is I think part of my trial work, like I loved being in front of juries. I loved being able to like do the kind of questioning with witnesses. And I don't get that anymore in my real life. And so being able to do that in that form, I love being put on the spot and like, you don't know what the questions are going to be. And you're like, okay, like how am I going to answer this? I love that. Like it's this adrenaline. I'm an adrenaline junkie and I'm through exercise and everything. And so this is like one of the things that makes me happy from that standpoint. But it's such a great opportunity. I think so many people get so negative about our policymakers, and I get it. Like it's hard sometimes, and they don't always seem like they understand all the issues. But we got to remember that they have like, 150 issues that they need to understand, and we have our world, and there are maybe 100 issues just in our world alone. And that's just one of the 150 topics that they need to be able to be smart on. And sometimes we don't give them that credit to understand that they might not be able to go deep on it. And I don't think we want them to. Sometimes we just want them to get it at a high level. And so I love being the person that walks into a room, regulators all over the world, policymakers, and say like they're negative or they're like skeptical. I love to turn them and to get them to see like the value of what this technology can do. And so I feel like that's just a super awesome opportunity to testify. It's just surreal because you're in the room, and what you guys can't see from the other side is that the policymakers, the Congress people are coming in and out, in and out, in and out. So they don't actually stay there the whole time. And rarely do they pan to that side because they don't want you guys to see that they're not all sitting there. But of course, they have like a million different meetings they have to go to do. But they come in and they ask their questions. They have their 5 minutes. But you as witnesses are there the whole time. And also like you get tired. Like sometimes I'd be at the end, like in the last, hour or so of the testimony, you're waiting for those questions. People are walking in and out of the room. There's no order as to who goes next other than seniority, but it's based on seniority as to who's in the room at the time. And then sometimes you get a question and you're like, okay, wait, focus, because you've been sitting there for 4 hours. So, but it is such an amazing experience. And I encourage anyone who can participate with policymakers to do it. And this is one of the things we did wrong in the early days of the web, is that we were like, we're so smart and you guys aren't, and we don't need you. And we'll do our own sort of like standards and we'll fix it ourselves. And we didn't engage deeply enough with them. And that's why I was super committed to doing it this time. And I just love it. I'm so grateful that I get the opportunity to spend time with them and that they take the time to try to understand what we're trying to do collectively as an ecosystem, not just at Stellar, but blockchain and crypto generally.
Well, I also think, I'm a little bit biased, but I think you're a fabulous ambassador for the industry. Thank relative you. To that. My sort of penultimate question for you, Denelle, and then we'll wrap, is when you think about the biggest opportunity to really meet regulators or legislators that, historically maybe the industry and that constituency has been talking past each other, but you think that there's real value in sort of meeting in the middle or collaborating. Is there any area that comes to mind there that you see as a big opportunity in sort of the near term?
I do think, stablecoins, I think it's going to happen domestically in the US. I think what we've seen already globally is we've seen a lot of focus on the stablecoin side. I do think tokenization brings a lot of questions about settlement times and just how you can use those assets. And I think that because you have traditional players that are very active already with policymakers and regulators, we're going to see something interesting. I would love to see these be used more as payment tools. Like if you think of Franklin Templeton's money market fund, and then being able to leverage that as payment opportunities, because then you're paying people with assets that they can generate yield on. It's a great thing, right? We can do that in our regular life with checkbooks. So why can't we do it with tokenized assets? So I do think that's another. And I do think in DeFi, we need to be understanding that regulators are fearful when they don't have one party that they can ultimately hold accountable. And that's okay for them to take that position because the outcome they're trying to protect against is harm to the consumer. And so we need to be mindful of how to engage there. And I do think we're going to have to encounter that a lot more deeply in 2025. And I think we're going to have to do it in a way that's open to understanding, because it's not just going to be the US, it's globally. We have to figure this out. And I think we're going to get there because we got there with the World Wide Web, right? And that was all about, who's going to be responsible for this thing? And now everyone's comfortable, so we can do it. And that was hard. And I was involved in that, but we need to do it now with this. And I think we can. So I think that's where we're going to get everybody together to make not all at once and not all in unison, but it's going to be like a process for us to be able to make that happen. And so get people more comfortable with DeFi.
Got it. So Denelle, we asked all of our guests for their high stakes hot take, which we define as biggest prediction for 2025 in the crypto or blockchain space as you see it.
Well, I said one of them, which I think the stablecoin legislation in the US is going to go through. I don't think that's going to be super impactful globally. I just think that what we're going to see next year in 2025 and 2026 is just billions and billions of dollars going into tokenization. I don't think that's a surprise. I think that is just, I think we're going to see all of the wealth management businesses be focused on that because it makes their businesses easier. And I think that's going to be a big piece of it. And we want to be a big part of it. And I think that, the regulatory environment is way more open to it now.
Couldn't agree more. With that, let's wrap. Denelle Dixon from the Stellar Development Foundation, thank you so much for coming on to High Stakes. Looking forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you, Alex. It's great to be here.
Keep exploring and keep innovating. Learn more at validationcloud.io and follow us on X and LinkedIn to stay connected as we continue to shape Web3 for institutions. This is High Stakes with Alex Nowaka, signing off.